sports note for Wednesday, September 25th. And the more things change, the more they stay the same, but it's also, to borrow the line from the legendary Roddy Piper, just when you think you have all the answers, I change all the questions. And that's what's going on in Charlotte right now, as the Bryce Young scenario continues to play out week by week and takes even more twists and turns. And if the Carolina Panthers are going to rebound from being arguably the laughing stock of the NFL, they got to get some semblance of, first of all, what the hell they're doing, and secondly, what they plan on doing going forward here. We know that the Panthers took Bryce Young number one overall last year, and there were several other options that they would have had at number one. Now, hindsight being 2020, revisionist history, whatever cliche you want to use, that they should have gone C.J. Stroud number one. Would it have actually made a huge difference? You could have actually put any of the first round quarterbacks. You could have put Anthony Richardson there. You could have put you could have stayed with Young. The Panthers right now are in such disarray. It wouldn't have actually mattered who was there. You could have brought in Kirk Cousins in free agency. You could have brought in Joe Flacco for a year. You could have, traded for any other quarterback, and the Panthers would still be in the situation that they were in through the first 2 weeks of this season. You've given Bryce Young the keys to a franchise, and you put absolutely nothing around him. Keep in mind that Bryce Young is 2-16 as a starter in the NFL, with 11 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, and he was benched after last week's 26-3 loss to the Los Angeles Chargers. But his best option right now, on paper, is a 34-year-old on the back end of his career and just went to injured reserve Adam Thielen as wide receiver. They've put nothing around Bryce Young. It's to the point where, do you take Steve Smith out of the broadcast booth and at least be able to give him an extra frickin' weapon? And then you bench Bryce Young and you go to the ageless wonder that is Andy Dalton, whose certainly best years are behind him. And Dalton goes out and throws for over 300 yards and a pair of touchdowns in Carolina's win on Sunday in Las Vegas against the Raiders. And then you actually stop and think about, and you look at Dalton's numbers, and his passing yardage was in one game was better than Young's through 2 games. It was the first passing touchdowns that the Panthers have had all season. He doesn't throw a pick. Young had a couple of them. And to make matters even worse, when Dalton hit Chuba Hubbard with a 6-yard touchdown just under 5 minutes into the first quarter, it marked the first time the Panthers had led in more than 10 games. Now, the Panthers had lost 5 in a row dating back to the end of last year, and that one win was that one win in week 16 of last year had been essentially a walk-off field goal. Now, if you take the Panthers' last 10 games prior to Sunday, they had only led for 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Let me say that again. 10 seconds. And then, granted, the Raiders are not the most ideal scenario right now. Carolina was 2-15 last year, and then there was that promising 7-10 season in 2022 when Baker Mayfield was there, and then Baker Mayfield leaves when all signs point to Carolina taking Bryce Young, which they end up doing. And that was the year that they ended up owning Chicago's number 1 overall pick. And then just completely shows signs. Young shows every sign of, being thrown into the deep end and having to swim with the sharks and blue whales at that point. Completely in over his head, and they completely stripped the cabinet bare because they don't have any high round picks to be able to go out and get skill position talent to put around him and grow with. So you're taking a team that finished under 500, you're stripping it further, and also you're not going out with additional cap money and draft picks that you've essentially shipped off here to be able to build back around him to allow you to progress. So they take a dramatic step back, and now even with the win, there's still no argument that the Carolina Panthers are the worst team in the National Football League, regardless of Cincinnati starting out 0-3, regardless of the fact that the Browns' one win, in their 3 games was against a terrible Jacksonville team. The fact that Jacksonville loses to Cleveland and then goes out and gives up 47 points in Buffalo on Monday night. So that's the underlying theme so far this season is starting quarterback play has been very, very inconsistent to where we've got guys like Andy Dalton on Sunday. We had Sam Darnold put up massive numbers as the starter in Minnesota because their projected starter, J.J. McCarthy, gets lost for the year at the very, very end of training camp. So the thought process, again, of Carolina being able to move forward with this is going to take a massive snag because now you have to realize that much like a scenario in Atlanta, in Cleveland, in Jacksonville, the Carolina Panthers backed themselves into a corner. You're not going to take Bryce Young, number 1 overall, and then have him go out and have a terrible rookie season where you have absolutely nothing for him and then don't do anything to improve going into year 2. You bench him after 2 games and then also realize that, hey, we're either going to have to trade him or we're going to have to put him back into the same scenario which we've had and allow him to get beat up again. If you're Cleveland and Jacksonville, you are not going to take guys making over $220 million and shove them on the bench, or in Cleveland's case, hoping that some of the allegations involving Deshaun Watson are true so you can try and shove him out the door. Again, revisionist history, maybe not sign a guy to those massive contracts based off of one good year or past histories at that point, like Cleveland did with Watson. But this is not going to be a scenario like what Cleveland had last year, and I'm sorry for making all the Cleveland comparisons, but being from Cleveland, it's the best way that I can equate this. But you're not going to have a scenario where Dalton is going to come out as gangbusters taking over for the number 1 starter, like when Watson went down late in the season last year, and Flacco essentially came in off the street and got the Browns into the playoffs. Carolina does not have the talent, especially in that division where Tampa Bay, even though they are 2-1, Tampa Bay looks like they're poised to repeat as division champions, but you're also going to have New Orleans, who is going to be there. Atlanta is going to be vastly improved, and especially with the skill position talent that they have, and the fact that they've got Michael Penix kind of waiting in the wings here. But we don't know where Carolina's going to go because there were also reports that they were fielding calls for trade for teams looking to trade for Bryce Young. But Carolina certainly, again, not going to part with him that soon. You don't go out and give up as much as they did between the draft picks and the players and then basically ride a guy for 1 year and 2 games and then shove him out the door unless you're going to get a king's ransom for him, and Bryce Young is not going to command that. So let's look at a couple of scenarios with teams that could end up needing his services, but if Carolina was going to make a move, they're starting to run out of time. And the first would actually be this weekend against Las Vegas. Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell seriously cannot be considered as starting quarterback options past this season. And we know that the Raiders really haven't had a number one quarterback since Jimmy Garoppolo was there. Well, Garoppolo's now the backup with the Los Angeles Rams. Was suspended the first few games of this year for performance enhancing drugs. The Raiders really have no plan. O'Connell is not going to be your answer. Gardner Minshew is the reason why the term career backup exists. He's had success as a temporary kind of year-to-year starter, but will never really kind of emerge to be that number one that you expect. Another option would be Jacksonville, because the book right now is out on Trevor Lawrence and the results are certainly not stellar. Go back and watch Monday night's game against the Bills. Jaguars are 0-3. Lawrence has not thrown for above 250 yards. He's been sacked 12 times already in 3 games. Buffalo got to him 5 times on Monday. And it would be a scenario is that if if Young does get dealt to Jacksonville, that it would be kind of a stopgap, that you got 2 number 1 overall picks involved with that within the last 5 years. And it would be a necessity because Lawrence wouldn't be able to stay upright and would actually end up beat up so bad and get knocked out of football with injuries at that point. Similar to kind of what happened with with Tim Couch. The other aspect that could be incredibly intriguing could be the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the Seahawks acquired some first round picks in the Russell Wilson fiasco and everything, and then ended up buying him out and everything. And despite having higher level first round picks each of the last couple of years in the wake of that, decided not to go with a quarterback. Bo Nix was sitting there. Will Levis was sitting out there. Michael Penix was sitting out there. And the Seahawks have passed on all 3 and need to start worrying about getting left behind in that division, because Carolina is going to be improved. The Rams still have the firepower, even though that their quarterback room is very old. And we're going to talk about the Rams here in a second. And naturally, San Francisco is arguably... I think the NFC is going to come down between them and the Detroit Lions, personally. But with the Rams, Matthew Stafford is 36, Jimmy Garoppolo is 32. Stetson Bennett is the third-string quarterback, and he's only in his second year, and he's already 26 or 27. But and you figure maybe Matthew Stafford's only got 1 more year left. Jimmy G is probably only going to see the field in an emergency situation. Stetson Bennett is not going to be a number 1 overall quarterback. The Rams could be intriguing, but with a room that has that much money, tied up in it already, and essentially has kind of become a marketplace for retreads or never was. I don't see, the Rams possibly being a scenario, but you cannot rule them out. And then the most obvious answer would be the Miami Dolphins. Now, with Tua Tagovailoa being out at least 3 more games with injured reserve, and now the report that backup Skylar Thompson got hurt, they may not have a choice because they're suiting up Ryan Tannehill, and Miami's got, I wouldn't even say arguably, I don't think you can look at the core of position players and skill position players, I would say, which would be your receivers, your backs, and your tight ends, and think that the Miami Dolphins don't have the most dangerous tandem of all of those in the NFL. They just need now somebody to get the ball into their hands. Bryce Young could be very intriguing, especially if if Tua does not progress in his concussion protocol and they have to keep him out later, and who's to say that it's after another severe concussion like he had, in Week 1 against Buffalo, ironically enough, at the hands of Damar Hamlin making the tackle where Tua initiated the contact, and kudos to Damar on his first NFL interception on Monday night against Jacksonville, which was arguably the highlight of the game for me as a Bills fan. But it would be intriguing to see Young with that crop of characters, namely having Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, just to be able to see how far he can throw it. I mean, those are guys that you always want a quarterback who can throw receivers open, but it also doesn't hurt if you've got a middle of the road quarterback that no matter where you throw the ball, that receiver is going to be able to go and get it, to be able to make it look like that quarterback's throwing them open when it's really the receiver getting the quarterback open, kind of working it in reverse. So that could be a very, very interesting scenario. And with Buffalo's 3-0 start, the Jets a little bit more improved, but let's actually see how long that lasts. They've got to worry about getting left behind in a crowded AFC for a year that a lot of people thought that the Miami Dolphins were going to contend for the AFC East title and possibly make a run of challenging the Kansas City Chiefs for dominance in the conference. Now, last thing about Bryce Young is that you're seeing a lot of people saying already, is he the biggest number one bust overall? You cannot make this argument this early that you still had Jamarcus Russell. Everyone is going to point at Jamarcus Russell, and with good cause. Jamarcus Russell played 31 games in the NFL. Bryce Young right now has only played 18. He's still got a little bit more time. After 3 years, Jamarcus Russell was out of football and never played another down in the NFL again. Bryce Young is still going to see the field at some point. Once he gets into year 4, the Jamarcus Russell talk is over because he's still on a roster, even if he doesn't actually have playing time. Regardless of whether that's in Carolina, whether he gets moved somewhere else, Bryce Young is not going to go down as the worst number one overall pick in the last 25 years. Now, arguably, there were others, way back prior to the start of the decade, to the start of this century, that have been worse. And hell, we're not even going to actually scratch the surface of top five picks that turned out to be bust, because then that's where you start getting into your Ryan Leafs. You actually have to start looking at your Rick Myers, possibly your Dan McGuire's, at that point. So don't close the book on Bryce Young in Carolina, certainly this season. There's a part of me that would still like to see him succeed for the fact of, and I would like to see him stay in Carolina, because I actually think if they actually were to get some talent around there, they could be competitive with him. Is he going to be the ones to get him back to the playoffs, and possibly run for a Super Bowl? Time's only going to tell with a number one overall pick. Does Caleb Williams look to be a world beater in Chicago through 3 games in his career? Certainly not. Even though he had himself a pretty good game on Sunday, and the Bears get a win. But if Bryce Young actually now has to make a move, and go somewhere else this early in his career, I would certainly hope it turns out a lot more like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold have done. Just maybe bounce around for a year or two and then find a landing spot where they can be a bona fide starter and come out and actually play like gangbusters. Certainly then a situation like what happened with a Josh Rosen, where Arizona takes him very high and then the very next season essentially gives up on him, goes out and gets Kyler Murray. And then there was also talk that, before they extended Kyler Murray, how little that he had actually done to kind of earn a massive extension and then the suspensions and the injuries that they could be looking to move on from him so far. So let me know what you guys think. Does Bryce stay in Carolina? Where do the Panthers go from here? Do you see him getting moved? And who's actually going to be the top tier quarterbacks as the season progresses a little bit more? We're going to see still some of the retreads, like Baker Mayfield, like Sam Darnold, continue to lead the league in passing, or are we actually now going to start seeing, those guys kind of come back to earth, and then your typical cream of the crop guys like your Lamar Jacksons, your Josh Allens, Dak Prescott, get back on track here and assert their dominance. So I will be back with you guys very, very soon. Everybody take care.